Well, welcome to Davos Today. I'm Steve Clark from Reuters. The headlines. The World Economic Forum 2008 gets underway in Davos with recession fears likely to dominate. Stock markets in Asia opened stronger in response to the surprise rate cut by the Fed, but they are off their early highs. We'll be looking at the markets throughout the program. And John Straczynski of Blackstone and Stephen Roach of Morgan Stanley will be among our guests as we set the agenda for Davos today. Well, first to Asia, where stock markets have been unable to hold their early gains. Let's cross now to my colleague Reuters' Tara Joseph in Hong Kong for the latest. Tara.
Hello, Steve. It did start off as a dramatic rebound here in Asia, but investors turned a bit doubtful after initial euphoria surrounding that surprise rate cut by the U.S. Federal Reserve. Japan's benchmark Nikkei has just closed. It ended up about 2%, but earlier in the day it was up by more than 3%. Shares such as Toyota were among the top performers today, the car maker gaining as much as 5.5%. Although it was the Fed's biggest rate cut in over 2 decades, investors don't quite believe that markets are out of the woods. They say recession risks still weigh. All around the region, analysts are saying that the emergency Fed move smells of panic. Some wonder when the next major round of bad news is set to come. Well, that said, Hong Kong has fared better so far today. As is often the practice, the city's monetary authority copied the Fed and cut rates to boost markets. The Hang Seng Index has surged more than 5% by the midday recess. China's top oil producer, also Asia's largest company by market cap, gained more than 7% by lunchtime. The dollar has been one of the big losers here in Asia trade. Dollar-yen has seesawed throughout the day with the moving sentiment surrounding stocks. It's currently trading at about 106.33. Steve, it will be interesting to see how Europe will move since it has had more time to react to the Fed news. And of course, all eyes on the U.S. Open later on in the day. After the bell last night, Apple Computer posted a weaker than expected quarterly profit. Later on, we get earnings from Motorola, United Tech, and Capital One Financial. That's how it's looking right now here in Asia. Back to you in Davos.
Well, thanks very much, Tara. Let's get the world news now. We cross live to Siddhartha Dubey in the Reuters London newsroom. Siddhartha.
Morning, Steve. A series of explosions rocked the southern Gaza town of Rafah as Palestinian militants blew up a section of the border wall between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. Earlier in the day, Israeli troops killed a Hamas militant east of Rafah. This came during a heavy exchange of fire inside the coastal strip near the border. Residents said Israeli tanks crossed into the territory to stop militants from firing rockets into southern Israel. In an effort to drum up consensus for his economic stimulus package, President George W. Bush says he believes common ground can be found with lawmakers.
Everybody wants to get something done quickly, but we want to make sure it gets done right and make sure that everybody's realistic about the timetable.
Bush met with Republican and Democrat leaders of Congress. The president wants to include tax rebates, incentives for business investment, and assistance for low-income people hardest hit by the downturn. Former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan is in Kenya to try to end the bloody political crisis that has left over 650 people dead. Annan is calling for the feuding political parties to start good faith talks. The African statesman, however, faces a tough challenge. Riots and ethnic fighting broke out following a disputed poll on December 27th that returned President Mwai Kibaki to power. An Australian actor, Heath Ledger, is found dead in his Manhattan apartment on Tuesday. Police said the 28-year-old, famous for his role as a gay cowboy in Brokeback Mountain, possibly died of a drug overdose. Medical examiners are conducting an investigation. Ledger leaves behind a 2-year-old daughter. He was due to appear as the Joker in the next Batman film. Well, that's it from London right now. Steve, back to you.
Thanks very much, Siddhartha. Well, political and economic leaders are arriving in Davos amid fears of a US recession which could spark a global economic slowdown. Well, I spoke to the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, ahead of the meeting. He says solutions can be found this week, but it's time for pragmatic optimism.
Those news, of course, are just one more reason to come to Davos, because if we look at possible solutions, it's not walking away, it's coming together to look at solutions, to define priorities, and then to go home and do the right things. But if you do it, you have to do it in a collaborative, global way today, and that's Davos.
Do you feel that Davos is in a position to offer solutions to the world? Is this just a talking shop, or can policies come out of a forum like this?
No, when you have 2,500 people together, there's a lot of creativity, and certainly all kinds of solutions will be developed here. But it's afterwards in the authority of the central banks, the international organizations, the individual businesses to implement those great ideas.
How do you see the dialogue between East and West this year? Because delegates from both hemispheres come, and we've seen Asian markets falling, we've seen Asian money bailing out US investment banks. I mean, do you think there's tension in that dialogue between the two camps who come together?
I think it will be very much discussed in Davos, the so-called national sovereign funds. And it's a new expression of where we are in the world. The power equation has changed, as we discussed last year. And if we look for solutions, we have to build them on the new situation we are in.
Last year, the mood was really quite optimistic. You could say no one saw what's happening now in the markets and the economy coming. Do you think people were too relaxed last year, in a sense, and weren't sort of analysing what was really happening in the world?
We had in our preparatory report last year, we had indicated that key risk will be the real estate and the financial system. But now we are in the crisis. It doesn't make a lot of sense to discuss the past. What I want to see is not pessimism now. I want to see pragmatic optimism. We can solve the issues. Let's sit together with the power of collaborative innovation, and let's plan and shape our future.
What would you yourself like to see come out of the Davos meeting this year?
I would hope that people do not pay only attention to the, let's say, crisis, but look also at the long-term issues like climate change, particularly water. I think water will play a major role here. And still we have the issues of poverty. I mean, we have a short-term issue at the moment, but we still have so many unresolved long-term challenges.
But it's going to be really hard to get people to focus on those things, isn't it, with so much happening in the world's economies at the moment?
Yes, but let's not forget, we had other crises in the past. The world economy, in principle, is very resilient. Even if we take the negative forecast for the world economy as a whole, we still foresee a growth of over 3%. So I think in the long run, we depend on resolving the long-term issues, the real fundamental issues, in addition, of course, to the crisis management, which we will do this time.
Once again, you persuaded 2,500 very high-profile delegates to come up here to the snow in Davos. Do you ever worry that they won't want to come, that the forum will run out of steam in terms of the annual meeting?
No, I didn't persuade them. I think they come because they recognize that today in the world, a multi-stakeholder platform where not only government people or business people or NGOs meet, but where really there is an opportunity to interact among all the stakeholders of global society is absolutely necessary to shape the global agenda.
And do you see Davos being capturing a lot of attention in the news this year because we've got the CEOs here, because of the news that's happening?
No, again, I think people at the beginning of the years, they want to know what is the future, particularly if they are under certain pressures, and they feel that Davos may provide some of the answers.
Professor Schwab, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Clark from Reuters. You're watching Davos Today. The time right now, it's 7:09. Let's catch up with our delegates here. And with me now is the first of them, Lou D'Ambrosio, the CEO of Avaya. Last year, the communications equipment company was bought out by private equity groups TPG and Silver Lake for $8.3 billion. The firm competes with the likes of Cisco Systems, selling hardware and software to help business customers communicate via the web. We're here in Davos with some fantastic, amazing market turmoil going on. Emergency Fed rate cut. What do you make of that as someone leading a major corporate yourself?
Well, I think it's clearly challenging times. I do not think, though, it's as bad as some make it out to be. For example, we are not seeing a dramatic change in capital spending right now in the U.S.
Do you feel then it's more of a banking problem than a corporate's problem? It's certainly the banks that's having to make the write-downs who have been calling for things like a rate cut. Do you think it's more their problem than yours?
Well, I think we have to be alert to all the sectors, and clearly it's most pronounced in the banking area. But I would say that if you look more broadly, globally, as well as across different industries, we're just not seeing the same impact that so many people are writing about. I just saw recently that the media has mentioned recession 50,000 times in the last 30 days. Companies' earnings and company spendings are not reflective of that type of turmoil.
So you're saying recession, what recession? Yet the Fed have just slashed interest rates by 3/4 of a point. Have they reached for the panic button too quickly?
I don't know. I mean, I say we should be alert to the situation. I think the panic button is one perspective. Proactive intervention is another perspective. I would like to think of the latter as opposed to the former. I do not think we're in panic yet, but I do think that there's an issue that we have to address. But we shouldn't be panicking or else it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy, frankly.
What's it mean for your own business? You're selling systems to major corporates. They're adjusting their budgets in the light of what's happening. I mean, do you see a more difficult year ahead?
Well, actually, what we see is people leveraging and using the technology to get them out of this situation, using to help them cut costs by reducing toll charges, using to help them grow revenue by getting more customers. So I do believe we're at a point in time with technology that companies will actually use the technology to help them get out of this situation, as opposed to reducing it significantly and running away from it.
Now, you've been bought out, you've gone private, so your share price isn't in play. Does that make you quite pleased that you sold out to private equity?
Well, I mean, look, the fact of the matter is there's pluses and minuses of public and private. I do believe, though, in a private environment, there are a couple major benefits. Number one is speed. The board, the management team, the investors, it's all the same group of people. So you have that alignment. And secondly, you have flexibility. In these situations, you are not acting in reactionary ways. You are not kind of pressing, as you would say, the panic button. You're doing what you need to do to create value for the company and not being distracted by external factors.
But also private equity firms are famous for cutting costs, sometimes said to be stripping assets. I mean, do you worry about that?
Well, look, we have to do what we have to do to ensure that we compete competitively and globally. Sometimes these types of market conditions cause companies to have a bit of a wake-up call, frankly, to take actions that arguably they should have been doing anyway. So we have this mantra in Avaya right now of, quote-unquote, getting into fighting shape. And yes, some of that will be streamlining our business, but frankly, most of our attention is in growing the business, not cutting costs.
You're in telecoms. You do a lot of business with call centers that are offshore. We know a lot of those in places like India. Do you see that trend peaking in 2008, or is that business model still viable for you?
No, we see the whole discussion of call centers increasing globally. That will consist of domestic call centers in the U.S. or wherever the organization happens to be located. It will consist of offshoring, but also will consist of homeshoring. Our technology enabling companies to have their agents work from their homes and being able to take advantage of new workforces around the world.
What about here in Davos? You've come all the way out to the snow with 2,500 other senior people for discussions. I mean, what brings you here? And do you think what's happening in the markets is going to overshadow everything this year?
Well, look, as you said, it's 2,000 people. It's a very intimate meeting with 2,000 people. But it is an extraordinary gathering of people coming together to figure out how to address societal challenges. It happens, the timing, that the economic situation will be high on the agenda. But collaborative innovation and how we bring different organizations together to think of new ways to do business, global warming, the climate. All these areas could be addressed now with people coming together and, frankly, taking the hard discussions head on and finding solutions for society.
So what are you looking forward to most? Is there any particular session that you're saying, I've really got to get to that?
I think what I want to hear is are the different perspectives from the geographies around the world on how they feel about the economy. As I mentioned, we are seeing, while U.S. challenges, we're seeing strength overseas. And I want to see if that perspective is shared by some of my colleagues around the world.
Lou D'Ambrosio, thank you very much for joining us on Davos Today. Well, let's take a look now what's coming up at the forum itself later today. Nidhi Dutt has the details.
The state of the world economy is likely to be the focus in Davos today. The UK's former Prime Minister Tony Blair and US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice will be highlighting the forum's key talking points at the opening plenary. Also appearing will be Henry Kissinger, a Davos regular, and the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase, James Dimon. As corporations and consumers alike ponder the global credit crunch, the big names in economics will be giving their assessments of the state of the global economy and sharing their forecasts for the year ahead. India's Minister for Commerce and Industry Kamal Nath and the chairman of Morgan Stanley's Asia division Stephen Roach will be presenting their views in a session entitled Update 2008 Economics. Other sessions taking place today include a look ahead to technology in the coming year, India's international agenda, and there's a look at the environmental issues in Where To from Kyoto. Finally, Israel's President Shimon Peres and Columbia University Professor Joseph Stiglitz will be sharing their thoughts on the power of collaboration, the theme of this year's forum in the Nobel Nightcap. All that and more on the opening day of Davos 2008.
You're watching Davos Today. I'm Steve Clark from Reuters. The time now, it's 7:16 here in Davos. Indra Nooyi, the head of PepsiCo, has been voted the world's most powerful woman in business, as well as leading the company that owns drinks like Gatorade and Tropicana. She's also co-chair of this year's World Economic Forum, and she joins me now live in our studio. Thank you very much for coming in today. Just looking at that market story, which has been unfolding in this week of Davos, what does that mean to you? We've had a massive rate cut in the US. How's that going to affect you at Pepsi?
Well, our businesses are quite different from capital goods or any other industry sector because we are in what I would call comfort foods. So when the economy is good, people consume our products because they feel good. And if the economy is not so good, they still consume our products to feel good. So I think in many ways we are counter-cyclical, and it helps us either way, whether the market's up or down. So roughly speaking, I'd say the current market turmoil doesn't really impact PepsiCo in a significant way.
But surely you must worry about the prospect of recession in the US. That's something that's going to be talked about here. In a recession, people worry about earnings, they worry about their shopping baskets. They don't buy so much.
You know, it's interesting. We've been talking about a recession, a slowdown for quite a while. We haven't seen it in our business in any significant way. And so, as I said, the comfort foods tend to ride out any economic downturn pretty well because people actually use these products as a filler to get their lives through these tough times. So we feel pretty good about our market prospects.
Were you surprised to see a 0.75 percentage point cut by the Fed yesterday? It was not expected. It's come very quickly. I mean, how did you feel about that?
Well, I think what the Fed is doing is trying to use all the levers it has to see if monetary policy can, in fact, stimulate the economy again. The Fed is staffed by extraordinarily talented people, and one has to put our faith in them and hope that things are going to turn out all right, that the market is going to get stimulated again.
What about looking outside the US? Because you've been looking to grow in other markets, grow by acquisition. Do you see yourself doing more of that in 2008?
A lot more tuck-in acquisitions, and we've been doing a lot of those in 2007. Our stated strategy is to buy companies that fit into our business processes that exist around the world and grow by bulking up the scale or filling in white spaces in our geographies or portfolios. And our strategy right now is to continue doing that because financially we're in a very good position. Our balance sheet is excellent, and the market turmoil doesn't really impact us, so our strategy continues unchanged.
What countries will we be looking at? We hear a lot about the BRIC countries, or the so-called BRIC countries, but where will you be looking beyond there?
Well, we actually say BRICS because the fifth S for us is the Middle East, run by somebody with the first name that starts with an S. So we actually add the Middle East because the Middle East is a region where 40% of the population is under 25. So it's a big growth market for us. So we look at all markets of the Middle East as potential growth areas. Clearly, India and China will have growth ahead of them for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And Brazil and Russia are emerging economies in many ways. So we do look at all of them plus the Middle East. And Latin America has been a stronghold for us forever. And we see our business growing fairly healthily in Latin America as that market starts consuming more of our Quaker Oats and all of our salty snack products.
But do you worry about the political tensions in the Middle East when you look at your strategy there, though?
You know, we've never been a victim of any political issue in the Middle East. In spite of the fact that we are an American-based company, a US-based company, we've been viewed as a very local company because our partners are local, our bottlers are local. So people look at us as a local drink. So it served us quite well.
What about more mainstream acquisitions? It's been said, I think, that Klaus Schwab would want to sell off a North American brand. I think Snap was one of those. Are you looking at that?
Not at the moment, no.
Can't tempt to say any more?
Nothing more. I've said everything that I've had to say, yes.
If not more, okay. Let's come to your role as co-chair of the forum, where everyone's gathering here today. It's opening. They've got quite a lot to talk about because there's plenty of news going on in the markets behind it. Do you think Davos can help create policy in this environment? Or is it really just a talking shop at the end of the day?
I think it can, Davos can do a lot. Davos can move mountains. And let me tell you in what area Davos can move mountains. In September of last year, I heard Prime Minister Brown of the United Nations speak about the Millennium Development Goals. And I heard him talk about we need to have a conclave of conscience to come in and address the Millennium Development Goals and actually make sure by 2015 we've achieved those goals, because we set ourselves those goals as a global community, as the leaders of the developed market. Forums like Davos are in fact conclaves of conscience because you have the NGOs, the governments, corporate sector, everybody coming in. We talk about collaborative innovation. These are the forums that we have to bring all of these people together and talk about how can we actually achieve those Millennium Development Goals. It is a tragedy that Davos is going to be overshadowed by discussions about the economic situation globally.
Right. In other words, a lot of those bankers are going to be looking at their BlackBerries rather than concentrating on what's going on in the sessions because there's too much happening back home.
Steve, you look at the BlackBerry, you can do nothing about it. So go ahead, look at your BlackBerry, but there are major issues to deal with. And I tell you, the strength of NGOs, governments, and the corporate sector is going to be tested severely because it's when you can address these sorts of issues, even through an economic downturn, because you actually look at these issues as a way to help your business long term, is when you know that all of us can rise above, short-term economic fluctuations.
And what issues are you most interested in yourself? I mean, you're in water safety and shortage, aren't you?
Well, I mean, I'm interested in water because it's one of the Millennium Development Goals. But if you talk about the overall umbrella of what I'm interested in, we are one of the signatories to the Millennium Development Goals. We take our role very seriously. When we sign on to something, we want to make sure that we do our fair share to contribute to it. So the way I've come into Davos is, first of all, to network and really meet people and understand what's going on in the world. There's no question about that. But all the sessions that I want to participate in is much more focused on how can we move this needle towards solving the Millennium Development Goals.
And if you could see just one key thing come out of the forum meeting this week, what would that be?
I'd like all of us to agree that we have to move from discussion to decision, research to action. And let's take on things that we as a conclave of conscience can actually do, as opposed to engaging just a discussion on things that we cannot influence, really.
Drinoy from Pepsi, thanks very much for joining us this morning. Well, amongst the delegates in Davos is a veteran of many years standing who's seen the forum's annual meeting grow from humble beginnings to today's world-famous gathering of business and political leaders. He's Ian Davis, Managing Director of the global consulting firm McKinsey. As MD, he says his focus is on the long-term health of the firm rather than short-term performance. When he came into our studio, I began by asking him if he thought this week's market events would dominate discussion in Davos.
Well, I think it's probably inevitable, certainly the first couple of days, that the recent events in the financial markets will be a hot topic of conversation. I very much hope they won't dominate the underlying themes, because although there's clearly a lot of turmoil and trauma in the financial markets, there's some very important as well as exciting underlying economic opportunities as well. I mean, I had thought a month ago we would be talking about globalization, global capital flows, Africa, climate change, and I think it'd be a great shame and a missed opportunity if the recent turmoil in the financial markets, which are undoubtedly incredibly important, there's an extraordinary thing that's going on, totally dominated and removed focus on that.
You have amazing access to clients via McKinsey. Is it something they're thinking and worrying about?
Well, when you think about our clients' reaction, it really does depend, or at least until recently has depended on the sector and where they are. If you go and talk to banks, particularly in the US and Western Europe, there's no question the financial market turmoil is the only thing, understandably, they're focused on. And you think, frankly, talking to some of them, the end of the world is nigh. But if you talk to people in technology, mining, and particularly in Asia and parts of Europe, they're much, much calmer and more sanguine. Now, having said that, there's a point at which the interlink between the financial markets and the impact on stock markets and capital flows must touch on the real economy. And I would think people in the consumer end of the economy, particularly in the US and particularly in Western Europe, will be certainly a lot more anxious now.
So there are a lot of very well-connected people here in Davos who are going to be talking about what's happening in the markets. But can policy come out of Davos, or is it really just a talking shop where people reassure and inform each other? Can anything concrete come out of this meeting?
Well, everybody has their own interpretation of Davos. My interpretation is that policy doesn't come directly out of Davos. I don't see it as a policy-making forum per se, but there's no question that the discussions and the mood and the context and the enormous number of meetings that go on does influence both individual and macro policies. So many of our clients, many of the politicians, maybe even some of the media, the conversations and the mood will unquestionably be an important input into policies that will generally be made subsequent to Davos.
The mood here in Davos last year was very upbeat. It looked as if it was blue skies ahead. Are you surprised by how rapidly that situation has changed to this year?
Well, I'm personally not surprised that it has changed. As you said, we were all desperately looking for a problem to solve, and we fixed on mostly social and celebrity problems as a primary memory of last year. And you know when that happens that sooner or later things have to change. And also I think we all knew that the imbalances that were clear in the economy were going to have to be fixed. But I have to say I've been surprised, and I think most people have, by the pace at which particularly the financial markets have unravelled has certainly come as a surprise to many of us, I think.
So there's other issues this year which you're saying don't forget. Do you think they're going to get much serious discussion at the end of the day?
I think they will. I think, people haven't come here for a week just to talk, and in the end you can only sort of gossip to an extent about these things. I think, we're investing a lot of time, and many people are investing their shareholders' or taxpayers' money, and I think we've all come for a reason. We do have to talk about globalization. We do have to talk about global capital flows. We do need to talk still about climate change. I hope issues like Africa and geopolitical tensions, particularly, but not only in the Middle East, and these are important issues that we do need to resolve. And I think the worst outcome of these financial turmoils if people forgot what really are fundamentally much, much more important issues.
Do you feel arriving here now that the mood is going to be an edgy one?
I can't tell, I'm afraid, at this stage. I haven't just arrived. I suspect amongst the bankers' financial community, I'd be amazed if they weren't on their mobile phones a lot and weren't quite distracted. I think that's another factor. You have to think how much will people be able to concentrate. But I would guess that particularly the Europeans and the Asians and people in the, if I call it not Wall Street part of the US economy, they're here for a purpose, and I don't think they'll let the short term dominate the mood. At least that's my hope. That's my hope.
Ian Davis, thanks very much for joining us.
Okay.
We were watching Davos Today. I'm Steve Clark from Reuters. It's exactly 7:28 in Davos. Well, let's take a look now at the weather coming up in Davos this morning with the all-important ski conditions. Here's Daniel Amann, the Managing Director of the Swiss Snow Sports School in Davos. Hi, Daniel. You're out there in the cold. It's very nice and warm here in the studio, I'm delighted to say. What weather are you expecting today? We had quite a bit of snow yesterday, but it looks a bit clearer today.
Good morning, Steve. Yes, after we had very strong winds yesterday and a snowfall from about 20 centimeters, today it looks fantastic. It will be a sunny day. The wind from the north will ease to light in the morning. Currently it's like about minus 12 degrees, but it's going to be spectacular.
Lovely skiing then. What about the state of the piece? Nice fresh fall of snow yesterday. Are they looking in good shape? Is anything closed?
Right now they're still saving the pits because there was fresh snow, so also the snowdrift were accumulation, so the avalanche danger is considerably high today. But on the slopes they will all be extremely nice. It will be fresh powdery snow and it will be safe, and you should go out there and ski.
Now, you're a local here, you're really an expert on conditions. If you were going out today, where would you ski? I've skied here myself. Everyone goes down to the Parsonhooter places like that. But are there some really special runs that maybe aren't so busy that you might go to?
I think today it will be wonderful everywhere. I personally would choose like the longest run we have in this area. It goes from a Hall Alpine region from the Weissflurjoch on 2,844 meters all the way down to Köblis on 800, so you cover over 2,000 meters in altitude, and it's over 12 kilometers long.
Daniel Mann, thanks very much. We'll be back with more news from you later. Right now you're watching Davos Today. It's 7:30. Well, coming up to you live from the heart of Davos with the latest from the World Economic Forum annual meeting. Coming up in the programme, we'll be speaking to John Stasinski of Blackstone and Stephen Roach from Morgan Stanley. But first, let's get the latest news from the markets in Asia with my colleague Tara Joseph, who's standing by in Hong Kong. Tara, what's going on?
Hi, Steve. We did see a rally in Asia stocks today, but the mood is somewhat subdued as worries linger about a U.S. recession. Japan's benchmark Nikkei closed about half an hour ago. It ended trade 2% higher, but earlier in the day, the Tokyo index was up by more than 3%. Today, shares such as Toyota were among the top performers, the car maker gaining 4.5% in this session. Toyota, like other major stocks, took a big beating earlier this week. Although it was the Fed's biggest rate cut in over 2 decades, investors don't believe markets are out of the woods just yet. They say recession risks still weigh, and some wonder when the next major round of bad news is set to come. Hong Kong has fared better so far. As is often the practice, the city's monetary authority copied the Fed and cut rates to boost market sentiment. The Hang Seng Index has surged by more than 5% by the midday recess. It's just starting its afternoon session now, and it is often susceptible to London's early sentiment, so interesting to see how we'll go from here. China's top oil producer and Asia's largest company by market cap has gained more than 7% by lunchtime today. Now, the dollar has been one of the big losers in Asia trade. Dollar-yen has seesawed with the moving sentiment surrounding stocks. It's currently trading at around 106.44. Steve, it will be interesting to see how Europe will move since it has had more time to react to that Federal Reserve news of an emergency rate cut. And of course, all eyes on the U.S. open later on in the day. One final note, the trading day is looking a lot brighter in the Gulf in the early part of the day. Dubai's benchmark index opened about 6% higher. This after a massive loss on Tuesday, its worst trading day since 2006. That's how it's looking right now. Back to you in Davos.
Thanks very much, Dara. Let's find out what's happening in the world news headlines. Here's Siddhartha Dubey in the Reuters London newsroom. Sid.
Hi, Steve. A series of explosions rocked the southern Gaza town of Rafah as Palestinian militants blew up a section of the border wall between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. Early in the day, Israeli troops killed a Hamas militant east of Rafah. This came during a heavy exchange of fire inside the coastal strip near the border. Residents said Israeli tanks crossed into the territory to stop militants from firing rockets into southern Israel. In an effort to drum up consensus for his economic stimulus package, President George W. Bush says he believes common ground can be found with lawmakers.
Everybody wants to get something done quickly, but we want to make sure it gets done right and make sure that everybody's realistic about the timetable.
Bush met with Republican and Democrat leaders of Congress. The president wants to include tax rebates, incentives for business investment, and assistance for low-income people hardest hit by the downturn. Former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan is in Kenya to try and end the bloody political crisis that has left over 650 people dead. Annan is calling for the feuding political parties to start good faith talks. The African statesman, however, faces a tough challenge. Riots and ethnic fighting broke out following a disputed poll on December 27th that returned President Mwai Kibaki to power. An Australian actor, Heath Ledger, is found dead in his Manhattan apartment on Tuesday. Police said the 28-year-old, famous for his role as a gay cowboy in Brokeback Mountain, possibly died of a drug overdose. Medical examiners are conducting an investigation. Ledger leaves behind a 2-year-old daughter. He was due to appear as the Joker in the next Batman film. That's it, Steve. From now, from me, back to you.
Well, thanks very much, Sid. Blackstone is best known for its private equity business, but it's also active in alternative investments like real estate and mutual funds. And this year it's already agreed to buy American hedge fund GSO Capital Partners. John Stadinsky is the Senior Managing Director of Blackstone Group International. He joins me now in the studio. Thanks for getting up early to be with us. I know you're not an economist as such, but I mean, obviously we're coming out here to Davos with an amazing economic background in terms of what's happening in the market. It's the surprise Fed rate cut yesterday. What's your own take on that? Do you think people are getting nervous about a US recession, and is that affecting the mood amongst people like yourselves?
You actually could not have a better background for Davos this year. I mean, I think it's one of the first times you've got an extraordinary set of factors all converging with respect to not only the economic environment, but this big international funds flow that you're seeing coming out of the East and going into the West. I mean, I think if you look at the world right now and you draw a line right through Frankfurt, you actually look at everything to the west of Frankfurt is having some problems. Everything to the east of Frankfurt, whether it's Eastern Europe, the Mideast, Asia, China, India, is still looking relatively promising.
Do you see then that funds flow accelerating in a east to west direction, because that's what we have seen in terms of some of the stakes that are being taken in these major banks? Are we going to see more of that in 2008?
Well, you know, funds flows, when you go back to the middle of the 19th century, J.P. Morgan said what investment banking is all about is crossroads of the sources and uses of funds. And really, for the last 5 years, you've seen this emergence of these sovereign wealth funds. They've always been there, but they've had a much higher profile over the last, certainly over the last 12 months. And I really don't think anything is going to be any different. I mean, this is a permanent change, and we're never going to be able to go back. The sovereign wealth funds, whether it's the European market or the American market, are here to stay.
What about the way in which they operate? Because I think there's been calls for a code of conduct, for maybe more transparency around them. What do you feel about that yourself? I mean, there seems to be an air of suspicion around their activities in a way, but is that unjustified?
I think, like a lot of things, there's always suspicion when people are not well informed. These are large funds that are run with very sophisticated groups of financial analysts. They have a strong fiduciary orientation, and they have very clear investment parameters. So, and for those of us who've dealt with them, we know that they're very no-nonsense, they're very black and white, and if you know them, you know what they're all about.
I mean, Blackstone itself, in China Investment Corporation, took a stake in you. I mean, are they active partners? How do they operate? How much do they want to influence what you're doing?
No, they're shareholders. They don't behave any differently than any other shareholders.
What about here in Davos? How do you feel about the mood here? I mean, do you think what's happening in the markets is going to dominate discussion and to the detriment, if you like, of other issues? And do you think there's nervousness amongst the delegates about what's going on?
Well, I just got here last night, but what I sense so far is, for the first time, we're going to have a real, almost laboratory of issues. Historically, we've had a number of issues, global warming last year, for example, but this year, the rubber is really going to hit the road with respect to the liquidity crisis and really trying to understand the relationship between interest rates and inflation.
But we know a lot of people come to Davos, an enormous 2,500 delegates, a lot of sessions, a lot of talking. Do you think any policy or initiative can come out of here at the end of the day?
There's nothing that you can substitute for good human interaction, and I think that's one of the great attributes of Davos. And I think to sit in the same room, to understand someone's body language, to understand where they're coming from on an issue, you can't replace that with all due respect, the media or any other forum. And I think that's why this is a very, very powerful opportunity. And to a certain extent, this type of gathering, given the world environment, is, I think, unprecedented.
Just finally, your take on the rate cut yesterday. It did surprise the market. It must have surprised even someone like yourself. Do you feel the Fed has loosed off its best shot from its locker now? What does it do if markets don't respond to this?
The thing that markets are desperate for right now is leadership, whether it's globally or regionally, and that is still seen to be lacking. And until the markets see a lot more leadership on a proactive basis rather than a reactive basis, you're going to continue to see this great anxiety and feel this frustration.
But is the Fed showing leadership or nervousness?
I think the Fed is perhaps showing apprehension.
Would you like to see more leadership, or do you think they can cut rates further from here, or we are now at a base for 6 months now?
I'm not an economist, so you've got some much grander people who are economists, I know, on this program later on this morning. I think it's a question of there's leadership and there's the appearance of leadership. And right now, I think both are where there's a shortage of both.
Including from the Fed?
I think globally.
John Stadzinski, thank you very much for joining us today on Davos Today. Well, the grim state of the world economy will tax the finest minds here in Davos, and that's been underlined by PricewaterhouseCoopers, which has revealed the latest findings from its annual global CEO survey. Sam DiPiazza is chief executive of the accountancy giant, and he's told Reuters reporter Darcy Lampton that the mood is somewhat mixed right now.
Well, there's certainly a change in the attitude of CEOs this year versus just a year ago. Last year we saw the most optimistic view from CEOs that we'd seen in probably 5, 6, 7 years. This year the numbers are significantly different, but the interesting part is that we're seeing a tale of two worlds. We're seeing the developed world's confidence go way down. The U.S. going from 55% being very confident to now less than a third. Western Europe, Italy, France, Canada, Japan, all less than a third in terms of high confidence. On the other side, high levels of confidence in China, in India, in Russia. India, over 90% of the CEOs feel enormous confidence looking into the short term.
And that lack of confidence is really driving the momentous decision we've seen from the Fed, cutting rates by 0.75% in the world's largest economy. Is that a panic measure in your view?
Well, it's certainly a response to the messages that the Fed's been receiving over the last several weeks, where you saw the job growth declining, the confidence levels that we're referring to also showing in drops of consumer confidence. The U.S. is in a very difficult spot now. The CEOs are pulling their horns in, and I think the Fed is simply responding, saying there needs to be a strong effort to bring that back into focus.
And really, the main driver of that gloom has been the credit crunch, mortgage meltdown in the United States, raising a lot of questions about accountancy procedures vis-à-vis things like structured investment vehicles. When it comes to off the balance sheet items, do we need to see some serious reform here?
Well, I certainly think that the problems that we've seen over the last 6 or 8 months has a lot to do with the sophistication and complexity of the financial markets, the interconnectedness of these markets around the world, the transparency around financial instruments, what was really being bought as these derivatives were being exchanged around the world. And these off-balance sheet vehicles, although well structured to begin with, had to be changed as the markets adjusted, and that's causing consolidation back to the banks. So increased regulation, I'm not sure, but certainly a higher level of transparency into the nature of the instruments being traded is going to be needed into the future.
Well, Sam DiPiazza there. Well, as you heard earlier, Asian markets have rallied following the 75 basis point cut in rates by the Fed, but they have dropped back from their earlier highs. Stephen Roach is the head of Morgan Stanley's businesses in Asia, home to two of the world's most important and fastest growing economies, China and India, and he joins me now in the studio. Stephen, just reflecting on that Fed move yesterday, first of all, what's your own feeling about it? You said in your blog today there, pushing on a string. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant is that there's basically two triggers to this recession that now appears to be unfolding in the United States. A sharp decline in home prices, reflecting a massive imbalance between supply and demand in U.S. property markets, and a bursting of the credit bubble. And I don't think 75 basis points, no matter how dramatic it is from the Fed, is going to arrest either of those dynamics. What worries me most about what the Fed has done is that they were finally brought into action by the market. So we've got a market-friendly Fed possibly injecting a lot of liquidity into the system, which will set us up for another bubble-led economic recovery.
You said in August last year that central banks were asleep at the switch. Do you think the Fed woke up with a start? Should they have been moving rates earlier, cutting rates earlier?
Well, I'm sort of worried all they did yesterday was hit the snooze button and they're going to go back to sleep, because they're going back to the same old story that we've had to put up with for the last 7 years, and that's excessive monetary accommodation that takes us from bubble to bubble to bubble. We don't have a central bank in the United States that pays any attention to the excesses of asset markets and to the excesses of asset-dependent U.S. consumers who have depleted their savings balances and have gone into debt at a record rate. It's time to put an end to this, I think, very reckless way of running U.S. monetary policy.
So what could or should the Fed have done or not done? Could they have held off yesterday? They saw Asian markets tanking. They were obviously nervous before the opening of Wall Street. Should they have sat on their hands?
Look, actually, I'm quite astonished that they did what they did yesterday, because you know, the Fed has a policy meeting next week, and you try to look at what information became available to the Fed that precipitated this dramatic move. There was only one piece of information that became available in the last few days, and that was a sharp decline in equity markets. So we've got, I think, prima facie evidence that we have a central bank that's being goaded into dramatic action just because of what the markets are doing. And again, this market-friendly mindset of conducting monetary policy is ultimately going to end in tears.
Do you think the Fed have lost credibility by this move? And what do they do now if the markets don't respond to this? Wall Street was still slightly down after that move yesterday. What other levers can the Fed now pull?
Well, the Fed's got one major instrument, and that's the overnight lending rate, the federal funds rate, and it just used a big chunk of its ammunition. So as they get the funds rate down to these very, very low levels, they do run the risk of running out of ammunition, as was the case with the Greenspan-led Fed when they did the extraordinary easing post-equity bubble about 7 years ago.
What would be your own timetable then for possible further cuts from here? I mean, where are you seeing a low, and could we get another 25 basis points, you know, a month, 2 months?
You know, that turns out to be sort of a fool's game. There is a meeting next week. There are expectations that they'll probably do another move next week. Bernanke is very much of the same mindset that Alan Greenspan is, and that is when there's an economy that's being adversely affected by the bursting of a bubble, throw caution to the wind, need to ease aggressively. So you can certainly see another 100 to 200 basis points of reductions in U.S. short-term interest rates.
And possibly another move as early as next week, you believe?
At their regularly scheduled meeting, that's correct.
What about the effect then in the broader U.S. economy? There's been a lot of talk about recession. So now we're getting this huge monetary stimulation. Is that going to stave a recession off in the U.S.?
No, I don't think so. Again, the recessionary dynamic reflects two developments that are well entrenched right now. The bursting of the housing bubble, the bursting of the credit bubble. Aggressive Fed easing is not going to stop those forces from playing out, unfortunately. What the Fed's easing will do, hopefully, is put a floor under the downturn, but then ominously set the stage for another bubble-led economic recovery.
You've been very bearish about the U.S. economy. I mean, is it in effect in recession now or very close to it?
I think we're close to it if we're not there right now.
What about China, India, these growth companies, countries where you've been quite bullish about them? How does this play into their prospects for 2008?
Look, I remain very bullish on Asia, and that's why I moved there. I got so depressed living in the U.S., it was time to move halfway around the world. But I think it's too optimistic to presume that these export-led economies in Asia will not feel the heat of a downturn in the world's biggest consumer in the United States. They certainly will suffer something of a growth slowdown. Their equity markets have been moving up rapidly under the false premise, in my view, that there would be some decoupling. I think that's now being mark to market.
And you seem to be saying that it's time for a real radical rethink in the U.S., that policy is too accommodative, if you like. What should the U.S. government be doing, if anything?
Well, the government, in terms of fiscal authorities, is going through a classic election year bidding war. We started out, I think, with $70 billion from Senator Clinton. President Bush said, "I'll see you and raise you to 140. I think Mitt Romney last week was up to 250. I do worry that for a saving short U.S. economy, we don't have the domestic wherewithal to fund a stimulus other than just a brief temporary stimulus. And there's always some questions as to whether or not that type of action really works.
And just finally, I know you're a regular attendee at forum events. You're in Dalian, for example. Do you think anything concrete will come out of the meeting here in Davos?
Something concrete always comes out of these meetings in Davos in terms of exchange, debate, challenging one another. But do we get a plan to save the world? Do we get some ideas that really have a lasting impact in the way we think about markets and the economies? I think it's asking too much of any event, even one as spectacular as the World Economic Forum in Davos, to come up with the Holy Grail in 3 days.
Okay, Stephen Roach from Morgan Stanley, thank you very much for
Thank you.
joining us today. You're watching Davos Today. It's 7:51 here in Davos. Let's take a look at what's coming up at the forum itself later today. Needy Dutt has the details.
The state of the world economy is likely to be the focus in Davos today. The UK's former Prime Minister Tony Blair and US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice will be highlighting the forum's key talking points at the opening plenary. Also appearing will be Henry Kissinger, a Davos regular, and the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase, James Dimon. As corporations and consumers alike ponder the global credit crunch, the big names in economics will be giving their assessments of the state of the global economy and sharing their forecasts for the year ahead. India's Minister for Commerce and Industry Kamal Nath and the chairman of Morgan Stanley's Asia division Stephen Roach will be presenting their views in a session entitled Update 2008 Economics. Other sessions taking place today include a look ahead to technology in the coming year, India's international agenda, and there's a look at the environmental issues in Where To from Kyoto. Finally, Israel's President Shimon Peres and Columbia University Professor Joseph Stiglitz will be sharing their thoughts on the power of collaboration, the theme of this year's forum in the Nobel Nightcap. All that and more on the opening day of Davos 2008.
Well, in the studio with me now is Sir Martin Sorrell, CEO of advertising and marketing group WPP, with a list of clients that reaches around the world and a deep understanding of both old and new media. WPP is well placed to see how the world is changing. It's been changing quite a bit, Sir Martin, on the markets this week. As you look ahead,
not
the financial markets.
The real world.
Well, that's an interesting point. Yeah. Is it bankers who are worried here and not people like you who are running real businesses?
Well, I hope the advertising business is a real business. Nice of you to say that. But no, I think in the real world, the fourth quarter of last year really pretty much continued as we saw the first 3 quarters. That doesn't mean there weren't significant shifts in terms of geography and as a result of technological changes. But by and large, things continued. As we look at 2008, we've had a very strong new business run, actually unprecedented in our history in the last few months. That might influence things, but we look at 2008 as being a pretty good year. We remain of the view that 2008 will not be the toughest year, probably be as good as 07 or maybe even better. The real issue will be in 09. And I think what happened yesterday with the Fed probably reinforces that, what we see, that 08 will be a reasonably good year driven by the Beijing Olympics, which has a significant impact on us and advertising and marketing, on the US presidential election and political spending, and the European Football Championships. In 09, with the new president looking at perhaps 8 years of power in the White House, there'll be kitchen sinking, as any CEO comes into a new company does. And then maybe we'll see a little bit of a slowdown in China. It can't continue to grow at 10%. If GMP is growing at 10%, our business grows at about 30%, organic growth, excluding acquisition and currency. And so that sort of pace of growth can't continue forever. There has to be a relaxation, again, which we would welcome, because we'd invest even more heavily in China.
But it's interesting. So you're saying 2008, looking pretty reasonable. We had the head of Avaya on earlier. He said, he doesn't think it's looking too bad.
Indra Nooyi was saying that...
exactly. So it makes you wonder then, what are bankers reacting to? What are they seeing that people like you aren't seeing?
Financial markets and stock markets really reflect what's going to happen in 6-12 months' time, and I think that's the case again. But with the Fed cut, I think what that does is sort of reinforces the position, because I think what we've seen is an escalation in commodity prices. Many packaged goods clients, for example, have been saying to us that their budgets have been affected this year by increases in commodity costs. They have a little bit of pricing power now because of inflation, which they haven't had for the last 10 or so years. And as a result, I think what we'll see is a little bit of inflation, more inflation creeping into the system, and that will demand a correction. Rather like Stephen said a few minutes ago, that will demand a correction in 09. I mean, he's always very bearish and probably King Bear, but maybe takes it too far. But I think...
But are you saying these cuts could be letting the inflation genie out of the bottle, if you like, well, that they are really cutting too early?
More so. Inflation doesn't hurt our business. Actually, if our clients get a little bit of inflation, a little bit more pricing power, it gives them more room to maneuver and has a positive impact on our business. We as an industry probably will be a lead indicator of a recession, and I think it's interesting that we've not seen a significant shift in purchase intentions in the advertising and marketing service industry as yet. Similarly, we lag the upturn because fear dominates a lot of client thinking, a lot of board thinking, because of regulation, because of fear of making a mistake. So I think we tend to lead the downturn and lag the upturn.
But do you think a recession can be avoided? Because Stephen Roach, who has been bearish, has just said he thinks one is coming if the US isn't in it already. Are you of the view that it can still be avoided and staved off?
Well, if you define it as 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, I mean, I actually think we probably won't get there. And if we're going to get there, probably it's more likely to be next year than this year, because we really are in a political cycle where you see the fiscal infusion on Friday, the 150 billion, 140 billion that was infused into the system. And that's a political decision because the Republicans don't want to go to the country with a weak economy. When was the last time we had a recession in an election year? We're in a political cycle. 09 is the time when you can give the electorate some bad medicine as you try and secure 8 years in office in the White House.
You're still sounding very optimistic about your Asian businesses, and yet interestingly the market problems started in Asia on Monday. Surely isn't there some mood of nervousness and apprehension there?
Well, we can talk ourselves into a recession. I always was sort of didn't believe in that, but I think we can be so gloomy that we can talk ourselves. Consumers can. I mean, you look at the interviews on the media today or in the newspaper. A lot of consumers expressing great concern. So we can talk ourselves into it. But what we see in the BRIC countries, or the BRICI, including Indonesia, or what Goldman calls the next 11, which includes countries like Indonesia and Pakistan and Vietnam, extremely positive and continues to be positive. Now, I don't subscribe to the view that the world's been decoupled. I think if the US catches cold, we don't catch influenza, but we certainly we are ill as a result of that. And I think it's still heavily coupled, less than it was. So I think we have to watch the repercussions. But so far, India, China, Russia, Brazil continue to power ahead, and we continue to make investments as we did this week in those regions.
Now, you're a regular at Davos. Right. You always come. I know you went to the summer Davos in Dalian in China as well. What do you think comes out of these sessions? Does anything really concrete emerge in terms of policy?
Well, the danger is that these are talking shops, and I don't think that you can sit on the top of a Swiss Alp for 3 or 4 days and solve the world's problems. But it is a useful opportunity for people to come together. I think Klaus's timing is once again remarkable, that he would stage Davos at this particular time. And given the crisis, the subprime crisis, the insurance monoline crisis, I think there's a good chance that you'll get concrete action coming out of this time, because it brings people together in a very concentrated environment, and there are severe pressures, as we saw yesterday. I mean, one of the things people say about the Fed cut, given its severity, given the fact it was out of cycle, did the authorities see something coming that we didn't see?
Expecting a lively Davos, more news dropping through the week, stimulating the debate here?
Yes, I think it'll be very lively. I think everybody will be on their BlackBerries and their phones, and maybe there will be less done as a result. A lot of people will be distracted, I think, particularly people on Wall Street. And interestingly, you've probably got every Wall Street house represented here. I mean, interestingly, the American companies, the CEOs of the major American companies, are not here in much profusion, because they're reporting their annual results. They're reporting their 07 results.
So, Martin Sorrell, thank you very much for joining us this morning. You're watching Davos Today. I'm Steve Clark from Reuters. It's now 7:59. And let's head back to the head of the Davos Ski School, Daniel Mann, for a look at what the weather's looking like in Davos today. And the sun is coming up. Well, light is coming up, Daniel. What are you seeing ahead today? It was pretty snowy yesterday, but it's looking a bit better this morning.
Yeah, it was very strong wind yesterday. We had a snowfall from about 20 centimeters, but today it's exactly the opposite. We have a real nice sunny day. There's fresh powder snow as far you can see. Temperatures dropped. They're like around minus 12 degrees right now. And also the strong wind from yesterday, east to light in the morning.
So the piste and the slopes that are open, can we assume everything's open today? It's really a perfect day for wherever you want to go around in Davos and Klosters.
I really would say today would be the day to go skiing. It's going to be fresh powder snow everywhere. All the slopes are groomed. You have over 305 kilometers of slopes, which are in 5 different regions. So you really have to go out if you get the chance.
And where would you be going today, Daniel? Can you recommend anywhere, a particular run?
Basically, to experience it all, from high alpine conditions down to the tree line into the forest, I would go to Parsen, make a long run, which can go from Weißfluggipfel all the way down to Koblenz. You cover over 2,000 meters in altitude and over 12 kilometers run. It's going to be a great run to do today.
Daniel, we're there. You're watching Davos Today. It's exactly 8 o'clock. Clark for Reuters. You're watching Davos Today, coming to you live from the heart of Davos with the latest from the World Economic Forum annual meeting. Coming up in just a few moments, Jim Rogers of Duke Energy. But first, let's get an update on the markets in Asia. We cross live now to Tara Joseph in the Reuters Bureau in Hong Kong. Tara.
Hello, Steve. Yes, a rally in Asia stocks today, but the mood is somewhat subdued as worries linger about a U.S. recession. Japan's benchmark Nikkei closed an hour ago. It ended trade 2% higher, but earlier in the day, the Tokyo benchmark index was up by more than 3%. Shares such as Toyota were among the top performers, the car maker gaining 4.5%. Toyota, like other major stocks, took a big beating earlier this week. Although it was the Fed's biggest rate cut in over 2 decades, investors don't believe markets are just out of the woods yet. They say recession risks still weigh. Some wonder when the next major round of bad news is set to come. Now, Hong Kong has fared much better, as is often the practice. The city's monetary authority copied the Fed and cut rates to boost markets. The Hang Seng Index is up by as much as 7% in afternoon trade. The market has also been pumped by fresh news from China that the stock regulator has given the green light for 2 new equity funds to invest in the country's A-share market. China's top oil producer, PetroChina, and Asia's largest company by market cap, is now up by as much as 10% in trade today. The dollar, however, has been one of the big losers in Asia. Dollar-yen has seesawed throughout the day with moving sentiment surrounding stocks. It's currently trading at about 106.44. As the trading momentum moves west, Steve, things are looking a lot brighter in the Gulf in the early part of the day. Dubai's benchmark index, it opened about 6% higher. This after a massive loss on Tuesday. That was its worst trading day since 2006. And bookmakers are expecting stocks to open higher in the UK, although trade is expected to be cautious. One trader telling Reuters that what people are really looking for right now is a sense of calm. It certainly has been a dramatic start to the week. That's how it looks right now from Asia. Back to you in Davos.
Thanks, Tara. Let's check in with Siddhartha Dubey at Reuters Newsroom in London for a look at the world news headlines. Sid.
Hi, Steve. A series of explosions rocked the southern Gaza town of Rafah as Palestinian militants blew up a section of the border wall between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. Earlier in the day, Israeli troops killed a Hamas militant east of Rafah. This came during a heavy exchange of fire inside the coastal strip near the border. And in news coming into the Reuters newsroom from the region, thousands of people are fleeing the fighting in Gaza, crossing over into Egypt using those holes in the wall that separates the two. In an effort to drum up consensus for his economic stimulus package, President George W. Bush says he believes common ground can be found with lawmakers.
And make sure that everybody's realistic about the timetable.
Bush met with Republican and Democrat leaders of Congress. The president wants to include tax rebates, incentives for business investment, and assistance for low-income people hardest hit by the downturn. Steve, I did want to give you a quick look at what's expected from European markets today. It looks like a mixed opening in London with the FTSE and in Frankfurt with the DAX rising, while the CAC 40 in Paris is looking to open in the red. Some relief there, it seems, from the Fed action overnight. Former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan is in Kenya to try and end the bloody political crisis that has left over 650 people dead. Annan is calling on the feuding political parties to start good faith talks. The African statesman, however, faces a tough challenge. Riots and ethnic fighting broke out following a disputed poll on December 27th that returned President Mwai Kibaki to power. An Australian actor, Heath Ledger, is found dead in his Manhattan apartment on Tuesday. Police said the 28-year-old, famous for his role as a gay cowboy in Brokeback Mountain, possibly died of a drug overdose. Medical examiners are conducting an investigation. Ledger leaves behind a 2-year-old daughter. He was due to appear as the Joker in the next Batman film. And that's it from London. From me, Steve, back to you.
Siddhartha, thank you very much for those updates from London. Let's meet another delegate at Davos now. Duke Energy provides electricity around the United States and Latin America and has recently applied for a license to build a new nuclear power station. Joining us now is Jim Rogers, Chairman and Chief Executive of Duke Energy. Jim, thanks for being with us this morning. We're asking everyone the same question, but it's important in Davos this year. You know, this market action that's going on, the Fed rate cut yesterday. What do you make of it, especially in terms of energy and what it might mean for things like oil prices?
I think there's a significant economic uncertainty that exists today. But the U.S. economy has been remarkably resilient with headwinds. $100 oil prices, which has drifted back a little bit. You have had deficits, the Iraqi war, the subprime issues, the housing contraction. And I'm more of an optimist because I think the economy is remarkably strong and I think it will continue to motor on, although the growth rate will be slower.
And in terms of actual energy prices, I mean, Brent crude's trading just over $88 a barrel as we speak. Can you see that coming down or what do you see ahead there?
I see oil prices continue to be in this range. I think what you're finding is that our economy in the U.S. and Western Europe were less energy intensive than we have been in past decades, and the impact of the higher prices has not been as dramatic, for instance, as it was in the 70s or the 80s.
Interestingly, you're yet another, I think the third positive CEO we've had on this morning saying, well, my business doesn't look too bad, and yet the bankers are worried, and yet the markets are worried, and yet the Fed is slashing rates. Do you think they went too soon?
I think this is a classic example of Main Street versus Wall Street. I mean, when the people that are doing the work, building the new products, exporting products, providing services. We continue to see the economy go. And I think maybe the bankers maybe are an early warning of what's coming, but also they may be a little more anxious about the future than we are.
You've been working on carbon dioxide emissions for a while now, just a slightly changed tack and what can be done to limit that. You're very pro nuclear power. Now, this is all stuff on the agenda at Davos. Are you worried that might get pushed into the background because of all the talk that there is going to be about what's happening in the financial markets?
For the past 2 years, climate change has been a primary emphasis here at Davos. But we've gone from rhetoric and the romanticism of addressing the issue to the hard reality of crunching the numbers, looking at the economic impact. So I think there'll be continued conversations about climate. But as I look at what goes on in the U.S. and around the world, a lot of work is getting done, not only focused on what the U.S. will do, and there's legislation moving, but also worldwide, what happens post-Kyoto 2012. And much work is going into that.
Everything still seems to be happening in some ways quite a leisurely pace. The world has been debating this for what seems like decades now, not even years. Are you concerned that things are moving too slowly in terms of this debate, in terms of government action?
I think people are learning this is a very tough, thorny problem. And the enormity of it is coming home to many people. But I think real work is getting done. And I think one of the keys, because there'll be great debate in the U.S. over the next 2 years, there'll be great debate in the world over the next 4 years about post-Kyoto. One of the key things that I see happening is more dollars being invested in energy efficiency. And these are the kind of things that reduce our carbon footprint and create real results in the short term while we debate the policy. And I think that is not as well, people don't see that as clearly as they see the ongoing debate.
What about nuclear power? Because I believe I'm saying you've applied for licenses to build nuclear power stations, and certainly in the UK, the government has talked about building more nuclear power stations. How tough is it going to achieve acceptance of those when there still seems a lot of public resistance to that kind of energy supply?
It's my judgment, if you're serious about solving the climate change issue, you have to be serious about nuclear. When you build a nuclear plant, very expensive, prices continue to rise, but it's really the only real source of energy with zero greenhouse gas emissions. It's got to be part of the equation. And a lot of the older plants, for instance, in the UK and even in the US, will be retiring. We need to replace them just to maintain our current carbon footprint. But we need to build even more. And that's going to be a great challenge. In the United States, for instance, we haven't started a new nuclear plant in 30 to 35 years. And so the infrastructure, the skilled labor, those are big issues for us going forward.
You've come out here all the way to Davos, to the snow. What's the one thing you hope you're going to take away or might be debated more fully here? Do you think any action can come out of a forum like this?
I've had the good fortune of being here over the last 7 years. And what I find is that when I'm on the plane going home and I'm reflecting on what I've heard, to me, Davos is more about listening than talking, because I hear new ideas. And actually, my point of view about climate really grew out of meetings here a number of years ago. So for me, this is more about listening, synthesizing, and then going home and saying, what can I do?
Jim Rogers, Duke Energy, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, as you've seen on the programme this morning, political and economic leaders are arriving in Davos amid fears of a US recession, which could spark a global economic slowdown. I spoke to the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, ahead of the meeting. He says solutions can be found this week, but it's time for pragmatic optimism.
Those news, of course, are just one more reason to come to Davos, because if we look at possible solutions, it's not walking away, it's coming together to look at solutions, to define priorities, and then to go home and do the right things. But if you do it, you have to do it in a collaborative, global way today, and that's Davos.
Do you feel that Davos is in a position to offer solutions to the world? Is this just a talking shop, or can policies come out of a forum like this?
No, when you have 2,500 people together, there's a lot of creativity, and certainly all kinds of solutions will be developed here. But it's afterwards in the authority of the central banks, the international organizations, the individual businesses to implement those great ideas.
How do you see the dialogue between East and West this year? Because delegates from both hemispheres come, and we've seen Asian markets falling, we've seen Asian money bailing out US investment banks. I mean, do you think there's tension in that dialogue between the two camps who come together?
I think it will be very much discussed in Davos, the so-called national sovereign funds. And it's a new expression of where we are in the world. The power equation has changed, as we discussed last year. And if we look for solutions, we have to build them on the new situation we are in.
Last year, the mood was really quite optimistic. You could say no one saw what's happening now in the markets and the economy coming. Do you think people were too relaxed last year, in a sense, and weren't sort of analysing what was really happening in the world?
We had in our preparatory report last year, we had indicated that the key risk will be the real estate and the financial system. But now we are in the crisis. It doesn't make a lot of sense to discuss the past. What I want to see is not pessimism now. I want to see pragmatic optimism. We can solve the issues. Let's sit together with the power of collaborative innovation, and let's plan and shape our future.
What would you yourself like to see come out of the Davos meeting this year?
I would hope that people do not pay only attention to the, let's say, crisis, but look also at the long-term issues like climate change, particularly water. I think water will play a major role here. And still we have the issues of poverty. I mean, we have a short-term issue at the moment, but we still have the many unresolved long-term challenges.
But it's going to be really hard to get people to focus on those things, isn't it, with so much happening in the world's economies at the moment?
Yes, but let's not forget, we had other crises in the past. The world economy in principle is very resilient. Even if we take the negative forecast for the world economy as a whole, we still foresee a growth of over 3%. So I think in the long run, we depend on resolving the long-term issues, the real fundamental issues, in addition, of course, to the crisis management, which we will do this time.
Once again, you persuaded 2,500 very high-profile delegates to come up here to the snow in Davos. Do you ever worry that they won't want to come, that the forum will run out of steam in terms of the annual meeting?
No, I didn't persuade them. I think they come because they recognize that today in the world, a multi-stakeholder platform where not only government people or business people or NGOs meet, but where really there is an opportunity to interact among all the stakeholders of global society is absolutely necessary to shape the global agenda.
And do you see Davos being capturing a lot of attention in the news this year because we've got the CEOs here, because of the news that's happening?
No, again, I think people at the beginning of the year, they want to know what is the future, particularly if they are under certain pressures, and they feel that Davos may provide some of the answers.
Professor Schwab, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, you're watching Davos Today. I'm Steve Clark, reporting to you live from Reuters. The time now, it's exactly 8:16. Well, rising commodity prices and their inflationary impact have been a feature of the economic landscape over the last 12 months. Craig Benetti, the president of DuPont's Nutrition and Health Division, and Sole, which is developing food from soya beans, joins me now in the studio. Thanks for coming in today. We're asking everyone really about their take on what's been going on in the markets and the Fed cut. I'd like to ask yours. It seems the other CEOs and business leaders who've been on are saying, well, business doesn't look that bad to me. I wonder what your feeling is.
Okay. It's a kind of a mixed bag, I would say. We clearly see a slowdown. We're seeing the effects, particularly of the U.S. housing market, obviously the subprime. So we're seeing those effects slower down. The agricultural economies, though, Steve, are increasing rapidly. So we're seeing that particular part of our business strong, and we expect it to be strong through 2008.
How worried are you then about recession in the U.S., and especially in that housing market? Is that something that you feel could be hitting you in 2008?
If I look overall at DuPont, though, we're very diversified, so we go into many different market segments. Also today, nearly 65% of our sales are outside the United States, and so we've just come off of 2007, and while we've seen a slowdown, we actually had 7% growth as a company. So we're continuing to see our growth in particularly emerging markets and markets outside the U.S. to be very strong for us.
You're in the foods business, obviously. Been a lot of talk about food inflation, price inflation. Is that something you see as quite likely?
Yeah, I continue to see the commodity prices staying high. If you look at what's going on, growing populations around the world, the need for food supply, and in addition, as we move into more and more feedstocks being used in the biofuels arena, I think we're going to continue to see the commodity prices stay high with us clearly through this year.
Now, you're also in GM foods, genetically modified food. It's still getting a lot of resistance in the West, and yet supposedly it is about increasing yields. Do you think that might make people change their opinion about it if food prices are getting more expensive?
Yeah, I think, you know, if you look at this, the benefits of the biotechnology and what it can do to improve yields, increase food supply, provide more nutritional value, I think as the benefits get seen more and more, we're going to see perhaps more acceptance. You still feel resistance clearly in Europe about this, and so we try to use an advisory panel for us in DuPont that we can look to get the full debate here, so we can balance the kind of risk benefits of this. So I do see the production of biotech crops have increased now more than before. In fact, in some cases, almost 90% of the supply is coming from biotech crops.
We hear a lot about the debate in the West. How do you find that debate shapes up in developing countries?
Yeah, much different, Steve. What you see is there the need for nutrition, the need for food production, and again, in a lot of the agricultural lands, a lot of cases pretty arid lands, so be able to use things that use less pesticides, able to increase yields on crops. We're finding those benefits clearly outweigh things you may see in the developed world.
You've come up here to Davos. I know you arrived yesterday. Mm-hmm. What comes out of a meeting like this for you, and how useful in reality is it?
Very, very useful. And what I really value here is the chance to talk to thought leaders and see how they are viewing things. So if I take to my role in nutrition, just a number of debates going on, particularly about how do we work together to improve nutrition in the developing worlds. And so I hope to walk away from Davos with a real firm understanding as to what's the opportunity, who should we be working with to help improve nutrition around the world.
Do you see more problems ahead there in the coming year in terms of feeding populations, especially in those developing countries?
Yeah, I do. I continue to see the need for protein sources, the need for nutritional sources that are of lower value. As we started out talking about commodity prices, food is getting more and more expensive these days. So I think this is going to be a big debate this week as to what we have to do to try to provide supplies to the developing world.
So you've come up here for that debate. Are you worried it's going to be sidetracked by the financial debate that's going to be on with everything that's developing outside, in the outside world, out of Davos?
I hope not, because this is a problem that's been with us for a while. It's going to continue with us. And so I really do hope that we can put aside maybe the current economic volatility to really think about the importance of food supply in the world.
Okay, Craig Benetti of DuPont Nutrition, thank you very much for coming in today. It's 8:21 here in Davos. For years now, the summit has been dogged in Davos by a view that it's divorced from the lives of real people. With the help of internet giant YouTube, that perception may get a major makeover this week. Reuters' Darcy Lampton now reports.
Few summits match the kudos of Davos. The forum is a magnet for the planet's political and corporate glitterati. But that's why it also wrestles with an image problem. Critics say Davos is an elitist schmooze fest, an ivory tower nestling in the Swiss Alps. Well, that accusation could soon ring hollow. The forum has launched a joint project with the video sharing site YouTube called the Davos Question. Anybody, anywhere can enter the debate.
one thing do you think that countries and companies and individuals must do to make the world a better place? It's a big, big question. It's not easy.
Matthias Lufkens is the forum's associate media director. He denies the move is a glorious gimmick.
This is the first time that we're creating a global conversation. It's not a monologue. We're getting actually world leaders to respond to questions from the YouTube community, and it is with global reach. We have done this in Davos before. We have the open forum, which was designed to get the local community in, and now we're opening this up to a global level.
Meanwhile, YouTube's Arvind Desikan hopes the Davos question proves an ideal way of linking two disparate communities.
So at YouTube, we're seeing it increasingly become a means of communication, of conversation between people. And the Davos question is essentially just an extension of that. We've had users from around the world express their opinions on a range of topics. And we're really hoping that the leaders here will come by the corner, look at these questions and respond to them and become part of the community in that process.
On the snowy surface and with the intense security operation behind me, it might still seem that Davos, at this time of year at least, is reserved for the global power elite. But go online and the landscape looks very different. Thanks to YouTube, organisers insist Davos is now truly connected to the outside world. Darcy Lampton, Reuters.
Well, it's 8:23 here in Davos. Let's just take a quick look at what's been happening on the markets. In Asia, the picture has been largely positive. The Nikkei is up 256 points. That's a 2% gain on the day. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng also making pretty good gains. That's up over 8% on the day at 23,543, a net change of 1,785. Very good gain from the Hang Seng there. In Shanghai, the SSE composite at 4,703, and that's a gain of just over 3% on the day there. And in India, that was also picking up the theme of gains across Asia. That's up 5.69% at 17,681. Well, we know that here in Davos, parties are a big feature of what people come for. That's where the networking goes on. But what really happens at a Davos party? We sent our reporter Richard Mackney out to find out.
Now, much of the main business of Davos is done in private parties and receptions. The first of these is tonight here at the Belvedere, and hopefully this purple pass should get us into this one. After that, it's invitation only, which means we have to be very nice to everyone in here, if necessary bribing them with, I don't know, money and women.
Davos to me has always been all about the networking and meeting people. Far more, the panels are good, there's a lot of good discussion, there's very serious issues discussed, but this is where a lot of connections are made that carry over year after year.
That's, well, Davos man loves nothing better than endless networking. 6 in the morning to midnight with lubricated by drinks in the evening, what could be better? Is
that enjoyable? Is that good?
Isn't that your definition of heaven?
No. Is it rude to go around looking at name badges and just saying, can I come to your party?
You gotta get what I call the glam spy.
Oh, I've had that a lot.
They look right at your name and they look at your title and then they look right away.
Yeah, I get it followed by a slight grimace and a look of immense disappointment.
You could almost just stick that in anyone's face here and get an interesting conversation. That's not a joke.
My thing is, my whole work is essentially to bring about a change in the human consciousness.
How much would you enjoy sex with somebody fat, somebody you hated, tying people up, sex with animals, threesomes, all kinds of things.
Right.
Okay.
Our program is taking a weird twist at this point.
Okay.
We haven't been invited to anything, and this is our first time here. How do we get into these parties?
You crash, my dear fellow. You crash in the finest sort of Borat fashion. I mean, you just...
Really? Just to strip down to underwear and put on a fake accent?
Well, I'm not sure that would...
No, that's...
Can we come to yours? Can we come to Coca-Cola?
Absolutely.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I'll just tell my guys you're there.
Right, we've got an invite.
There you go.
You're watching Davos Today. I'm Steve Clark from Reuters. We'll be coming to you throughout this week from the Old Town Library, which is right next to the Congress Centre, where we've got our studio here. We're on air at 7 a.m. Swiss time each day until 8:30. You can see us on Reuters.com, where we'll be archiving the programme each day, and also on IHT.com. That's the website of the International Herald Tribune, and also FT.com. You can see the programme throughout the day on there. Right now, though, it's 8:27. Well, before we go, let's have one last weather check from Daniel Amann, the Managing Director of the Swiss Snow Sports School in Davos. Daniel, it's getting light out there. What are you expecting ahead on the weather today?
I really expect on the weather that it will be just a gorgeous, wonderful, sunny day. You will see Davos at its best, and after the strong wind from yesterday, the snowfall, today is really the day to go out.
And what about the state of the peace? It must be pretty good, because we had some nice snow yesterday, didn't we?
Indeed, we had a lot of snow. All the pits are freshly groomed, so it's really wonderful to go out there. They're also prepared, they're safe, and it will be spectacular today.
Just briefly, you can get a little bit of avalanche danger after fresh snow. What should people look out for there?
Yeah, that's the bad thing about the snowfall from yesterday, and also about the heavy wind. There was a lot of snowdrift accumulation, so therefore the avalanche danger is considerably high today. So don't leave the secured slopes, except you really have the proper gear, which means you have a probe, you have a shovel, you have a beeper, and best you also have an avalanche airbag.
Okay, Daniel, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That's about it for now from Davos Today. We'll leave you on the news that Asian markets rallied after that Fed cut yesterday, and most of those markets are up on the day. Obviously, everyone will be eyeing Wall Street opening later today. From me, Steve Clark from Reuters, that's it for Davos Today. We'll see you at the same time, 7 o'clock tomorrow morning.